Jacques Cheminade. So I also made a mistake. You saw that I warned you. But before we start, we will have a musical presentation by John Sigerson, who will sing us three songs from Schubert.
A few words. My accompanist is Martin. Since there is no translation that you have, and I just wanted to explain a little bit about each of the two songs that I'm doing. Both of them are composed by Robert Schumann. The first poem is about, well, you've probably heard the term, the writing is on the wall. And I don't know how many of you know where that comes from, but it comes from the Old Testament, the Bible, the book of Daniel. And it's about the king Belshazzar, who challenges God and says, know that I'm God. And a hand comes and writes in fiery letters on the wall certain words, mene mene tekel upashin, which nobody can interpret. Daniel ends up interpreting them and says that basically what they say is that your days are numbered as king. But Schumann, the poem was the great German poet Heinrich Heine took from that story, and he wrote his own poem on it. He leaves Daniel out, but nonetheless, everything else is the same. And I don't know if you know what the ending of Belshazzar was, but it wasn't good. And so that's the first one, and it's a dramatic recitation. And the second one, as a kind of a relief from that, is a poem, a Schumann setting of a poem by Friedrich Rückert, one of the most greatest lyric German poets of the 19th century. And it's entitled Der Himmel hat eine Träne geweint, which means that heaven shed a tear. And what happens to this tear is that it thought it would just lose itself in the ocean, but an oyster came along, or a mussel, and took it inside of it and said, "I'm going to be you are going to be my little pearl." And then it shifts over to the poet, who says, well, I have such a teardrop in my own heart, but I have to keep my own soul pure enough to hold the purest of your tears.
hastig gesaut, den Grund und rufet laut mit schäumendem Mund. Der Hoher, der Könige Verikon, ich bin der König von Babylon. Das Brauserwort verklang, dem König ward heimlich im Busen bang. Das gelbe Laden verstummt also lang, das wurde leise still im Saal. Sie am weißen Wand, da kam's hervor die Menschenhand. Und sie schrieb am weißen Wand Buchstaben von Freude und Spiel und Schwand. Der König stieren Blicks da saß, mit geschlossenen Knien und Totenglas. Die Knechteschar saß kahl, so graut, saß da still, gab keinen Laut. Die Magier kamen, doch keiner verstand zu deuten die
Et après, je balance, je bascule. Pas mal cette pièce de théâtre.
After the musical presentation, we can open the session, and would like to invite Mr. Jacques Cheminade. He is a former presidential candidate in France, and he is the president of Solidarité Progrès. So, Jacques.
My best to all of you, to all that are already warring angels, and to those in the becoming. Something happened since I wrote my speech. United Kingdom and France, I mean Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, and Charles III, have decided a closer cooperation of the two countries' nuclear forces and an expansion of joint military sectors. This is a pact of imperial rule intended to create chaos and confusion. I have to say a few words in French to express my anger on that, given the danger that it represents. First thing, I am really angry, en colère.
Colère. I'm really angry because this is a choice which is done to conduct a high-intensity warfare in Europe. This choice is done since 2010, since the Pact of Lancaster between France and Britain by Emmanuel Macron, signed by Sarkozy. I confirmed them, was signed by Sarkozy, and then François Hollande and Macron. It is something which penetrates the spirit since 15 years, and then there's the coalition of the willing, which our friend Ray McGovern calls the Great Dead Coalition. They have few weapons, they have no money, and they don't have popular support. But the danger is that they try to drag Trump into a war policy, which is an increasing danger. They saw Trump's weaknesses, in which the British have profiled. Then their objective is to prevent the economic cooperation in terms of currencies and economics between the EU and China. They put all their efforts to prevent what Helga LaRouche calls a team to make this policy work between Italy, Germany, and France, with the BRICS and China. The maneuver is to do exactly that, and it targets the memorandum of understanding between the Schiller Institute and the Académie of Studies and the world, which we heard this morning. We have there a coalition of people which are in a state which, when, like all people who are weak, they can poison all the rest. And this provokes my anger in front of this debasement of our leaders. They're destroying the hope that we can organize our people by a determined non-violence to stop this criminal madness. One have to say we have to re-establish hope in Berlin, but also in Rome and in Paris. This is, now I go back to English. It's
our mission as
new
human
beginning.
Beings is to do the good. The condition to succeed is to reveal the truth, to know the face of what we have to confront. Lazare Carnot, the organizer of the French victory against the coalition of European monarchies and founder of the Republican École Polytechnique, who inspired West Point, defines such a mission as to raise to the dignity of a human being all the individuals belonging to the human species. LaRouche, in the last of her 10 principles, conceived to improve our intervention in the present historical moment. LaRouche tells us, and I will quote it again because it's worth thinking about it and in depth putting it in the real challenge for each of us in this moment of history. The basic assumption, she says, for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul, and of being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is a result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome. This has first to be said in order to be in the position to meet our strategic challenge. It takes place in a world where international laws is systematically violated, where our policy makers cynically believe that might makes right, allow genocides to be committed, and obscenely show them on our television and our smartphones, promoting narratives based on lying manipulations. No way to hide, no place to enjoy a romantic despair. In such a world, to take refuge in the coward comfort of pessimism would amount to cooperate with the evil. We have to confront the world's danger in human history. We have facing the worst danger in human history, because it is based on its control of the most advanced technology deployed worldwide. First, a quote from Alex Karp, the left-hand partner of Peter Thiel's right in Palantir, in order to measure the intention of our enemies. At the 2024 Reagan National Defense Forum, he Alex Karp, openly embraced a worldview based on domination and fear. They, he said, meaning US rivals, they need to go to bed scared. They need to get up scared. He added, my version of service is that soldiers are happier when the enemies are scared. And Americans go back to enjoying the fact that we are the only ones with a real tech scene in this country, and we are going to win everything. Here you have a cynical expression of fascist geopolitics by a man who controls a firm built with CIA money in 2004, and now dominates most of the world data and intelligence in all industrial and other matters. Palantir, a hyper favorite of the Wall Street market, owns a platform called Mosaic, the one which induced the IAEA Council on June 12, 2025, to state that Iran did not respect its nuclear commitments on the military deployment of nuclear energy, and thus justified the surprise Israeli bombing of Iran the day after. That's what Palantir is. Palantir is only one of the worst craps in the Silicon Valley of cyber transhumanists and tech libertarians convinced of their power to rule the world with digital weapons, killing bodies at distance with drones, killing minds with mental weapons, and who now have cryptocurrencies flooding the economy. They play on the manipulation of irrational sense perception. Again, Alex Karp, he states, the work began with the observation that certain expressions have a drive-releasing effect, and this effect occurs not despite, but because of their apparent irrationality. They think that they can control wars on our minds through screens into a new screen data tech age with the belief that the Übermenschen among them are going to become immortals through the transmission of their minds into computers. I'm not exaggerating. They say it, they write it, they behave to impose their messianic wet dreams. Their messianic wet dreams. They have their control on the integration of their men into the army and the financial economy. In the army, they have integrated the Army's Executive Innovation Corps, designing to fuse cutting-edge tech expertise with military innovation. Private sector know-how has thus been brought into uniforms. The 4 designated new Army lieutenant colonels are respectively the Chief Technology Officer of Palantir, the Chief Technology Officer of Meta, the Chief Product Officer of OpenAI, and the former Research Officer for OpenAI. Their nomination is just the beginning of a bigger transmission, a bigger mission to recruit more tech pros who will not have to abandon their careers. Fear means here, with them, to impose the weaponization of all, play with a strategy of nuclear threats, and impose a new financial Lebensraum to rule in the form of a 3.0 Roman Empire. As for the economy, their aim is to put it under the private rule of cryptocurrencies, having convinced President Trump to bet on them with the illusion of building an American crypto empire. In the same ideological way as the hippies of the 1960s were turned into tech-addicted Google yuppies, now they are the Google yuppies and even Google employees, through delusions and sense gratifications of power. Those who thought that the revolution of the cryptos were going to free the individuals from the state rule and big finance were turned into servants of the new fake money, of the empire of the new fake money. There are now between 11,000 and 20,000 different cryptocurrencies issued in the whole world. Most of the youngers and elderly youngers, mesmerized, run to buy them to make easy money. I have no time here to enter into an explanation, probably Dennis Small would do it later, of how the cryptos multiplied in the environment of the decentralized finance and prevailed after the 2007-2009 world crisis, and how, through their connection with the stable coins and the blockchains, they are going to inflate the Ponzi scheme into the bond system of the Federal Reserves, creating a final bubble of all. If you look at the billionaires around Trump, they have now all the same pedigree: Scott Bessent, Stephen Myron, David Sachs, Paul Atkins, et al. Connected to the crypto tech universe and having made their fortune on financial or real estate bets, cutting expenses in the physical economy and thinking that to be a genius, they have this genius bill in the Senate, like to be a genius is to produce money with money. We should believe that Trump genuinely wants peace, and there is indeed evidence of his disgust for insane wars. I have a personal anecdote on that. But his Achilles heel is that he pretends to build peace on the quicksand of virtual money, having himself as his family benefited from it without any connection with the physical productive economy. Let's look at J.D. Vance, Donald Trump Jr., and Eric Trump on May 28, 2025, at the Bitcoin 2025 conference at the Venetian Hotel of Las Vegas. Eric Trump said he would love to see some of the big banks go extinct, not to support a new Glass-Steagall law or a bankrupt reorganization of the system, but to open the path to unrestricted crypto speculation. On March 7, President Trump in person convened a crypto summit at the White House State Dining Room, where he appointed speculative venture capitalist investor David Sacks, a friend of Peter Thiel, to be the combined AY and crypto czar of the United States. Are those forces new? Are those forces obscure forces? Not at all. It's the expression inside the United States of the British system as Lyndon LaRouche unmasked it. There are no tariffs for them. They can join. By the 1950s and 1970s, the US dollar had been transformed into the London dollar of international financial markets, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Bretton Woods gold reserve monetary system had been pulled down. Now, following the crypto assets order published by the British Treasury, the British Chancellor of the Exchequer has positioned the United Kingdom to take the lead, playing the US administration cryptocurrency game, focusing on US stablecoins and expecting to proceed from its offshore tax havens. Let's listen to J.D. Vance, quoted by the British media unheard. Not so long ago, the President, Donald Trump, actually loves the United Kingdom. He loves the Queen. He admires and loves the King. It is a very important relation. He's a businessman, and he has an important number of relations in the world of the British business. But I believe that it's much deeper than that. This, again, J.D. Vance. It is a true cultural affinity, and of course, America is fundamentally an Anglo country. To understand the rules of the game of what's happening before our eyes, one needs to read or reread Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and return to the Brave New World, the second book he wrote in 1953. And H.G. Wells' Things to Come, together, I must add, with Philip K. Dick's own rantings. That gives a sense of this present becoming deprived of the good. Better to know about the proceeds of the Tavistock Institute, the contribution from R.D. Lang, and the extensions of the Frankfurt School into the US opens even a better understanding of the insanity prevailing in our societies of what some call the global West. So that gives us a sense of what our enemies are planning. Their policy is self-destructive, but they nonetheless apply it like a casino player who continues betting against the reality principle. Betting, more than drilling, betting. And the reality principle is that there is a majority of the world rising against them, and that peace through common economic development is the law of human nature as a one, not a dream, but the first human right. So even if they may think that they are all-powerful, their feet are made of fragile clay. They are Ozymandias. There are the BRICS against them, or not against them. They are the BRICS as an alternative. The BRICS threat is not against something, but as an alternative of the good, for the good. There are the BRICS, now 10 members and 10 partners, more than half of the world population. They are the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, and more regional organizations demanding the right to development and self-determination. There is in the making what in his time General de Gaulle called for a system of détente, entente on development, détente, entente on cooperation and development. Perhaps it's emerging not where he expected it to happen, but it's emerging with his intention. Elga Sepp LaRouche calls for a new international development and security architecture for the benefit of all nations as the only alternative to stop the descent into nuclear war or a collapse into a Malthusian world imposed by our enemies and leading us to another form of human extinction. The Gaza genocide shows its direction, and we must stress, it shows its direction, the direction of the way of behaving. If we don't stop it, the 9 principles of Elgazep LaRouche, preceding the last one that I read before at the beginning, define a process to be enriched and extended by a dynamic of contributions. At the opening of the July 6-7 BRICS plenary, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva pointed to the danger of a nuclear catastrophe and stressed that it is up to the BRICS to contribute to the new multipolar reality of the 31st century. Dilma Rousseff, the former Brazilian president, head of the BRICS New Development Bank, explained before how her intention is the first step in the direction of credit for real development. Russian President Vladimir Putin made 2 key points. First, multiplying capital investment by the BRICS countries, including through BRICS mechanism, primarily the New Development Bank of Dilma Rousseff, appears to be an important goal as well. To this end, Russia proposed creating a whole new BRICS investment platform. Second, Putin specified the need of creating an independent payment and monetary system within BRICS to expedite currency transactions while also ensuring their effectiveness and their security. This goes in the direction of what he himself calls neither a unipolar or even a polycentric world, but a polyphonic world where all voices are heard and contribute to the whole with their various registers. This is a very high concept, and it's precisely where Lyndon and Elgazep LaRouche are always fought for. True, the BRICS final communiqué punts on needed new credit mechanisms and on the issuance of a new financial instrument to balance deficits and surpluses in exchange in national currencies, outside the rule of a financial dollar, not against, but outside. The proposals from Sergei Glaziev, inspired by Lyndon LaRouche, and of Brazilian economist Paulo Nogueira Batista, go in the direction of a basket not of currencies, not a basket of currencies, but of physical commodities with a price fixed through long-term contracts out of the rule of the markets. Such proposals are on the table. The reality principle being thus a priority of human creativity associated to the development of true physical economy, ending forever the rule of monetarism and physical oppression, colonial oppression, physical in the sense of imposing by force. Lyndon LaRouche has written on this issue a very inspiring paper on basket of hard commodities, trade without currency, defining the strategy to be followed. Such are key contributions for a new beginning if we want to avoid nuclear annihilation. LaRouche also wrote what he called 4 new laws to save the US now. I want to read them because I think it's very important to be based on expression of principles given a form in the physical world, the physical economy. The first law says, the system has to be put under control, restoring Glass-Steagall to the forces Wall Street to reconcile their huge debts on their own, bankrupting most investment banks in a controlled and orderly way, and it will free up commercial banks to act as real banks against speculation. And again, we don't want Wall Street gambling. We don't want Wall Street gambling. And I have to add now that we needed to cut the association of treasury bonds to the casino board games. The second law calls for national banking in the Hamiltonian tradition, not a central bank ruled by bankers. By making the goal of improvement of national productivity rather than turning an immediate profit, the national banking approach allows investment that would otherwise not be made. The third law calls for on credit on higher energy flux density. Today, we must focus the increasing of energy flux density in the infrastructure public works platform, in machine tooling and on science itself, the key to make all other developments possible. Everything changes together. Productivity is about the whole. The fourth law, demands implementation of fusion energy to open the potential for dramatically increasing our energy supply, to transform our relationship to physical materials through new types of processing, our relationship to water as through desalination, and the ability to rapidly reach and the possibility to reach rapidly any part of the solar system. Adopting a mission to achieve fusion is putting into practice a goal of Hamilton, who wrote that to cherish and stimulate the activity of the human mind by multiplying the objects of enterprise is not among the least considerable of the expedients which the wealth of a nation may be promoted. That's a whole, and it demands thinking and contributions. It is an inspiring strategy for every single country, each with its national characteristics, all for an improvement in the conditions of humans, not to be wolves for men, but to develop their power to improve their environment and increase their potential capacity for population density. In that sense, LaRouche's voice is the voice of the future. I campaigned myself in France under the banner of seeing my country with the eyes of the future. The LaRouche organization has now published a great and beautiful economic recovery plan 2025 in the spirit of 1776 that aims to inspire a return of the United States to the revolutionary, anti-colonial spirit of the Founding Fathers, freeing America from the British invasion once again. China, with its One Belt, One Road initiative, has the best policy approximation of that strategy, even if it has to be cautious because the tiger of the financial oligarchy becomes more dangerous when it is, like now, wounded. It cannot win. It's impossible to win, for him to win. But he can still drive the others into his deadly descent. It can bring us down with it. We have, therefore, plenty of food for optimism because our enemies have no alternative. If we expand our fight to join the commitment for sovereignty of the world global majority. I want to conclude with another good news. The coming fall of artificial intelligence, if it remains under the rule of the insane cryptomaniacs and warmongers. Artificial intelligence is not like a magic weapon. It's something that takes place in the physical reality. First, it will self-destroy its own future if the physical economy does not change, and except for the defense industry, the physical economy is not changing under rule of the oligarchy. Because it will fail, because the AI needs, under present conditions, increase exponentially. He needs energy to increase exponentially, and will soon push America's aging power grid to the brink if nothing is made about it. Nothing is done about it. The insane techs try to develop nuclear energy to feed it, grabbing existing technologies instead of developing fusion energy. They are doomed to drown for lack of energy. Second and worse, AI as it is, is reaching its peak, the peak data that Elon Musk himself warned about. Why? Because the development of the generative AI has reached its limit of available data in the real world to train its models. To steal data from the web and online human activity has reached its limit, and to face this scarcity in the real world, the tech masters are issuing artificially generated data by algorithms from AI itself. Some think that already back in 2024, more than 60% of the data mobilized to train the generative AI were from synthetic origin. Of course, this creates the conditions of a model collapse, increases of biases, loss of diversity, and amplification of mistakes and errors. Besides, a serious study from the MIT University, shows that the intensive use of the AI weakens human minds, especially for children and teenagers. It destroys the capacity to think independently and creatively and creates cognitive dependency. In other words, under its present rule, by forces increasingly decoupled from the productivity physical economy, AI is like a dog, biting faster and faster its tail, while having its blood sucked by an ever-increasing plague of cryptos, virtual currencies, and tokens. Does it mean that we have to throw the AI baby with a basket? Obviously not. Elgar has stressed it when she intervened in her Madrid conference. AI is extremely useful in an environment controlled by sane human beings to perform tasks that could be done in an environment made of predefined discoveries and axioms. It is operating in a world of predefined security discoveries and actions. It replaces human repetitive labor and is useful in that environment, even out of human reach. To react by itself in an environment defined by a scientist, for example, if incorporated to a rover on Mars, or to help on conditions of a major disaster. The point here is to produce sane human minds that won't use AI to select people to kill, like the Israeli Defense Forces with Lavender did in Gaza, or to organize swarms of AI-controlled killer robots on Earth, or to set an all-out war in space. The conclusion is that we need a new beginning, a new architecture to produce sane human minds able to discover or rediscover new physical principles for the good of all, beyond the axioms of the present dying system of the global West. Not because we are in the West or because of our skin colors or cultural habits, but because we have dropped our own historical capacities, because we have dropped our own historical capacities to do the good. The strategic challenge is to recover them through their creative improvement, like our predecessors improved in the past, to have something to bring to the raising global majority. A win-win world is the only possible sustainable future for all humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques, for having put artificial intelligence in the correct light and also highlighting the stupidity of the oligarchy. The oligarchy is evil, but let's not forget it's stupid. So our next speaker, I think he is connected per video, President Ramotar. Do we have him? President Ramotar, he is the... Ich sollte Deutsch sprechen. Donald Ramotar ist der ehemalige Präsident von Guyana. Dennis, do we have it? Wenn wir den noch nicht haben, dann würde ich Elisabeth Murray to the podium, because she has to take a plane. Let me introduce you. Many of you know her already. She is a former Deputy National Intelligence Officer for the Near East. So she was for the National Intelligence Council, which is not the CIA. But sie ist die ehemalige politische und Media-Analystin für die CIA. Sie war damals, glaube ich, 27 Jahre, 24 years, you have worked. Und sie ist heute ARD und außer Dienst in Retirement. Und sie ist Friedenaktivistin. So, Elisabeth, welcome, and I leave you the podium.
Vielen Dank. Es ist so schön, in Berlin zu sein. Und ich möchte auch Sie, Frau Dr. Sepp LaRouche, bedanken für die schöne Einladung. Dies ist mein erstes Mal beim Schiller-Institut. Ich muss mich entschuldigen, denn ich werde diesen Vortrag auf Englisch gehen, denn mein deutscher Wortschatz geht nur so weit. So, Dankeschön. Just as the introduction said, I spent 27 years in the Central Intelligence Agency, but mostly on the open source side. Ray McGovern and I came here together. He's my colleague. He retired 10 years earlier than I did. And when I retired, I asked and he invited me to join Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, an association of former intelligence officers who try to advise the current administration in the United States about correcting policy. And we also, as part of the Sam Adams Associates, which is an associate group, we give an annual award to whistleblowers. Some of our recipients in the past have been people like Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and others. So I'm very proud to be part of this group. But I don't want to talk too much about my intelligence career. I think you might be more interested in my activist career, but I do want to tell you one anecdote about my time in the agency, which really helped motivate me to want to immediately become a peace activist when I retired. Back in 2010, just a few months actually before I retired, I was invited to attend a very prestigious think tank conference in Washington, D.C. And the subject of the conference was Middle East issues, but in particular, the 2008 to 2009 Operation Cast-led attack perpetrated by Israel in Gaza, in which about 1,400 innocent civilians were killed. And there were some panelists in the front of the room. I was in the audience. And when the number came up, 1,400 civilians killed, one of the eminent panelists, who was probably one of the most prestigious experts on the Middle East, kind of gave a very smug, strange smile, and he said, you know, it's very unfortunate, but every once in a while, you have to mow the lawn.
That's it too, but I don't know, it's just blank. I mean,
and you know, your reaction shows me, your reaction to this anecdote shows me that you all have a human heart. But the reaction of the audience that day was laughter. There was a light laughter in the room, and people were smiling at the notion that every few years, Israel can go into Gaza or to any part of the occupied territories and cut down the newest generation of young people to make sure not too many militants grow up under occupation, which, as you know, is an intolerable situation. And I was in the audience that day, and I remember looking around and seeing that not a single person stood up to voice opposition to this. And I really asked myself that day, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I had had the privilege of living in the Middle East for several years. In the 1980s, had visited East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, and had a chance to see with my own eyes what was really going on. And it occurred to me that it was very different from what our American mass media were telling me. But there were several similar incidents like that throughout my career, such that as soon as I was able to retire, which I needed to do to take care of my mother, so I retired immediately when I could, I went immediately into the peace movement, in particular the anti-nuclear weapons movement. And I'm now a Stewardship Council member of the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action in the state of Washington. And we have a house there on 3.5 acres, and we share the border fence of our property with the naval base Kitsap Bangor, which houses 8 Trident nuclear submarines, each of which has the capacity of 3 Hiroshima, Nagasaki bombings. So every year our center holds three different actions, one on Martin Luther King Day, and these actions we usually go to the base to protest nuclear weapons. We hold a vigil, and also on Mother's Day, and also on the commemoration of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And actually, I'd like to mention that a few days before Ray and I came to Berlin, we stopped in Koblenz to visit a pastor, Pfarrer Rolf Stahl is his name. And we visited Pfarrer Stahl because an American colleague of mine, who's also a nuclear resistor, you may know her name. Her name is Susan Crane. Susan Crane was part of an international group who protested at Büchel a few years ago. And Susan entered Büchel base, where, as you know, the American nuclear weapons are stored. And she and her colleagues placed loaves of bread onto missiles and onto aircrafts that would drop nuclear weapons. In other words, bread, not bombs. And she spent 7.5 months in a German prison. She only got out earlier this year. And while in German prison, she was 81 years old. So the prison administration, die haben sich über sie gekümmert. They were worried about her because I guess you can't be released to work unless you are under 65. But there she was all by herself doing nothing. So they released her to work with Pfarrer Rolf Stahl. She worked in the garden and such. But she didn't just work. She educated everybody in the community, in the Gemeinde, about nuclear weapons and why it's important to oppose them. So when Ray and I visited, everyone knew who Susan Crane was. Everyone had the highest respect for this woman. And I'm only telling this anecdote because it's an example of what one person can do. You know, she was in a bad situation. She was in prison, but she made the most of it. She educated everyone, and she inspired people. And so this is just kind of a wonderful thing that has happened with people who join international groups and are able to spread the word. I also want to mention that at the Ground Zero Center, where I volunteer up in Washington State, we have many of our members are actually former employees of the base, and one of our members is the former captain of a nuclear attack submarine. And so there is the potential for transformation, and we try to reach out to those who may disagree with us at first, speak to them quietly and calmly and just plant seeds and see what happens. And we also leaflet at the base. We pass out leaflets. One of our members actually met her husband. He was a base employee passing out leaflets. But we have a respectful relationship with the base. We have been there for more than 45 years. They know that we're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. And I'm just very, very proud to be a part of it. I just want to mention one more thing about myself personally. Thank you. Vielen Dank. I just want to mention one more thing. I have to go to court in Tucson, Arizona on September 2nd. I have been charged with criminal trespassing. I was one of several activists that entered the Raytheon compound in Tucson, Arizona, which is now manufacturing nuclear weapons and conventional weapons that are being used in Gaza and other places that the United States bombs. And Raytheon employs 15,000 people in the Tucson area and is unfortunately the largest employer. So I went in to Raytheon compound, and the security tried to convince us to leave, but we just stood there. And the reason we just stood there was at Ash Wednesday, and we had a sign that said, Raytheon nuclear weapons will turn all of us into ashes. And as they arrested us, They didn't take our sign away, and we kept holding it. And they didn't handcuff us either. They were treating us with quite a lot of respect. And so we saw employees going into Raytheon, looking at the flashing police lights, and most of them did this and like this. And, you know, never underestimate your power to transform people. And you never know who you may reach with your actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elisabeth. So, wollen wir sehen, ob der Präsident Ramotar da ist, bitte? Noch nicht? Gut.
We want to see if Mr. Ramotar can speak now.
Herr Rastbeen ist der Vorsitzende der Akadémie
Nicht. Ali Rastbeen gehen wir nun in Frankreich, also Geopolitische Akademie.
Bitte einen Applaus für Herrn Rastbeen.
Er wird darüber reden, eine Welt im Wandel, a world in crisis, a new Eastern crisis, the world is changing.
Hello, thank you very much for your presence here. In the name of the Academy of Geopolitics of Paris, I have the honor of being associated with the Schiller Institute and also with the Board of East German Associations to organize this event. Your presence here demonstrates your commitment to jointly reflect on the building of a more just international order, also more stable and truly inclusive. For over half a century, the Middle East has been the stage of exceptionally intense and prolonged conflicts. Since 1970, these wars in Syria, Yemen, Palestine, Kurdistan, and between Israel and Iran have caused nearly 4 million deaths. These violences unfold within a polarized geopolitical framework. On the one side, there's a pro-Western axis, including Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt. On the other side, there's a resistance axis composed of Iran, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Hamas, often supported by Russia. Between the two, countries such as Turkey, Qatar, or Iraq try to maintain a relatively fragile autonomy. This rivalry is deepened by fractures of a sectarian, geopolitical, and ideological nature, and it's prolonged by proxy wars in which the civilian populations pay the heaviest price. It would be reductive to analyze the region only through the lens of states. The Middle East is also shaped by powerful internal dynamics and educated youth, civic and women's movements who aspire to achieve a deep transformation. The Arab Spring and the 2019 uprisings opened breaches, sorts of spaces of resistance, despite repression, nepotism, and corruption that too often stifle this momentum. On June 13th, 2025, about 1 month ago, Israel launched a premeditated attack on Iran, targeting in particular peaceful nuclear facilities. This aggression raised condemnation unanimously by major international organizations, by the Non-Aligned Movement, 120 states, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, 57 countries, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They all denounced this strike as a serious violation of international law, of the UN Charter, of national sovereignty, and of fundamental human rights. These strikes were also seen as an attempt to sabotage the ongoing diplomatic negotiations in Muscat between Iran and the United States, aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear agreement. A group of international legal experts launched a petition denouncing the illegality of these Israeli and American attacks. The preventive use of force invoked by Israel has no legal base under either the UN Charter or under customary international law. Even worse, the strikes that targeted protected nuclear installations and as well as civilian infrastructure, and that violates humanitarian law, nuclear law, and international environmental law that gravely undermines disarmament systems, non-proliferation regimes, and the international rule of law. In the face of such blatant violations, Europe remains silent, if not complicit. Since October 2023, over 60,000 Palestinian lives have been lost. In Iran, more than 1,000 people were killed in just 12 days of airstrikes. Some even targeted prisons where European nationals were housed, or sensitive civilian infrastructure, and that in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Iran, in its official response, invoked Article 51 of the UN Charter to assert its right to self-defense. legitimate self-defense, while also calling for the application of Article 39 so that the aggressive states be identified and be obliged to provide reparation. This escalation reveals a broader truth. The failure of multilateralism. External powers have fueled regional instability. Iran has strengthened the Shiite arc through non-state military alliances. Turkey is carrying out military interventions to assert its own regional ambitions. Israel continues to conduct illegal airstrikes in Syria and Gaza, and the United States, in relative withdrawal stance, has left a vacuum that's now being filled by Russia and China, who have become central geopolitical players in the region. The Abraham Accords, by normalizing Israeli-Arab relations, have marginalized the Palestinian cause, reducing it to a mere geostrategic variable. In this context, international law is eroded, the UN Charter is weakened, and the repeated resort to unilateral interventions, for example, in Serbia, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, fuels deep resentment across southern societies. Syria, that was stabilized at the cost of Russian intervention, has become a symbol of the collapse of multilateralism. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian conflict illustrates a multipolar world where rules compete directly with brute force. In this global recomposition, marked by normative fragmentation, the resurgence of power politics, and the weakening of institutions, a key question is posed. What frameworks, theoretical and practical, allow us to think about peace in the Middle East today? To ask that question is to acknowledge the failure of the old paradigms. Peace cannot be imposed through military alliances or by so-called preventive bombings or by top-down agreements when they come from the top. Peace requires the following: international law as an inalienable foundation, the sovereignty of peoples without double standards, and the inclusion of all regional actors, including Iran, whose stability is essential. Multipolarity, if not grounded in shared norms, will yield only chaotic disorder. It can only become a path to peace if it opens the way to cooperative balance and not conflictual balance. And above all, it is the civil societies, the youth, the women of the Middle East who carry the seeds of change. They are the ones who embody the peace to come, if they are just given the means to express it. The Middle East is not merely a battlefield, it's a mirror of the state of the world. What unfolds there concerns us all. Energy security, migration security, terrorism, power rivalries. Iran, according to a famous expression, says, no peace without Iran. But beyond that geopolitical lock, the entire regional system must be rethought. A fair, inclusive, multilateral architecture grounded in sovereignty and law. We must no longer instrumentalize human rights. We must defend them in their universality. We must no longer tolerate injustice. We must build genuine solidarities. Peace in the Middle East is not an illusion. It is a necessity. And above all, it is a shared responsibility.
Und ich hoffe, wir haben endlich Ramotar.
Now we finally have Mr. Ramotar here. Good morning, Mr. Ramotar.
Okay, welcome to our conference. Herr Donald Ramotar, wie gesagt, ist der ehemalige Präsident von Guyana.
He is the former president of Guyana and
beteiligt sich
is often involved in other conferences of the International Peace Coalition. International Peace Coalition. Mr. Ramotar,
can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Clearly.
Okay, please.
Go. Thank you. Thank you so much. Allow me first of all to congratulate the organizers of this important meeting. We need this more than any time because of the times that we are going through at this moment. We are living through very dangerous times. Tensions, wars, and threats of wars are the dominating features of our period. Why, one may ask, are we at a point of such great uncertainties? To paraphrase Antonio Gramsci, it appears that the old order has become bankrupt. It has achieved its usefulness and now it's not able to solve the new situation. But a new order is yet to be born, and the danger it is creating, the old order is creating, is immense. The United States and the European Union foreign policies are based on wars and threats of wars, and these include sanctions against countries and now against organizations and even against individuals. In our region, in the Caribbean, Cuba has probably been the longest country under sanctions, and it is just because they want to find a new path, a more humane path of development. They are being daily harassed and sanctioned. And the situation with Russia-Ukraine is also part of that dying system that wants to control everything, and probably a hangover for the Western attitude towards the Soviet Union. where they see Russia as an inheritor of the Soviet Union, at least some aspect of that policy, the peace policy in particular of the Soviet Union, and which they need to crush. But nothing has shown us more clearly the decadence of the system that we are living under than what is today taking place in the Middle East, where the old order is in decay and is most glaringly seen in the Gaza, in the West Bank, and in the Jordan River, and in East Jerusalem. There is a genocide taking place in plain sight of the world, but no attempt to stop it is being done by the powers, that people that got the power to do so. Instead, we see a brazen, barbaric way in which human lives are being crushed. Among them are children. Children are deliberately being targeted. So are women and special groups such as doctors and medical workers, rescue workers are all brutally murdered. Journalists and their families are being marked for death. This situation is diminishing our humanity. The Western world, in the Western world, the US and NATO member states in particular are not just complicit in this barbarism that is taking place. They are participants and facilitators to the gruesome destruction of the communities and lives. To protect the fascist apartheid regime in Israel, the Western powers have even moved to violate international laws and to destroy international institutions. On June 13th last, Israel made a surprise attack on Iran and killed many of its leading scientists and senior military personnel who were at home at the time. Tragically, it appears that the IAEA was used by Israel and the United States in this attack on these individuals. This, in my mind, is state terrorism in its clearest form. Iran has accused the IAEA of informing the US and the Israeli and Israel in particular of where and who were these people. And that is why they are accusing them of being part of the killing of those people who were civilians and military people. The US and its allies have targeted the ICC, the International Court of Justice, because they dared to charge Israel and the Prime Minister of Israel, his finance minister and his defense minister. They're also very critical against the International Criminal Court, International Court of Justice, where they're joining with Israel to defend the charge of genocide. And most recently, the vicious attack against Francisca Albanese, because she has been exposing what was taking place in Israel and pointing out that many companies are making profit from the genocide that is taking place in Israel. I believe that this is an extremely brave woman, and she is more deserving of a Nobel Peace Prize than those who are hankering for it. And she deserves for her contribution to defending humanity and opposing the genocide that is taking place in Israel. In her latest report, she convincingly exposed the immorality of the corporations in the bourgeois states. Imagine even the states, not only the companies, but the states, like pension funds, being used to make money in these desperate times. But in this darkness that we're going through, hope is once again arising and being kindled. And this is due to an awakening in the global south as to the system the systemic nature of our underdevelopment. Global South countries that fought so gallantly for independence for decades found itself in poverty and moving from one debt crisis to another. Yet, it will be surprising to know that although they talk about the debt crisis in the developing countries, the developing world is still a net contributor of capital to the global north. We send more, in fact, some estimates are that from 1960 to now, that a net transfer of $152 trillion from the South went to the North due to the system, the mechanism that is used to continue to milk our countries. Whenever any of the countries from the South tries to break the vicious circle, they are confronted with a variety of sanctions, as I mentioned just now in Cuba, threats, and military invasions, like we see the killing of Colonel Gaddafi in Libya because he was trying to go towards another system. For a while, after the then former colonies banded together in the non-aligned movement and exerted some influence internationally. However, with the collapse of Eastern European socialist countries in the late 80s and early 90s, that influence waned somewhat. Today, new hope has been restored, and this is coming from the decision of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, countries that are determined to uphold their independence and to defend their sovereignty, to come together to try to create a new path of development which would be more fair and distribute the world's wealth in a more equitable manner. The contrast of the policy of these countries towards the Western countries, which use their foreign policy to threaten, to blackmail, and to create wars. Here they're trying to create prosperity, so because they recognize that prosperity must be mutual, that we cannot go on with one part of the world reject poverty and another part living in wealth at the expense of the other. And that is what the proposal of the Schiller Institute to create prosperity for all, so that we can all develop together. And that is behind the thinking, I believe, of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is opening up and creating new possibilities for countries in the global South. It is that philosophy of win-win philosophy and mutual benefits that I believe is what we have to look forward to. In the process, new institutions are being created, like the BRICS Bank, and hopefully other institutions that will look into justice and to prevent wars by creating more development, that it will take place. However, we will have to continue to guard against all of the machinations of the West, because many times they use like newfound wealth in countries to create tensions between different types of countries so that they can sell more weapons and not only milk the resources of those countries, but be able to sell them weapons and to destroy each other. I hope that the global North will be able to see the developments in the BRICS not as a threat to them, in the sense that they are aiming to destroy their prosperity, because I don't think that is what is happening. And I hope that there will be leaders in the West who will see it as an opportunity to try to partner with the BRICS countries in order to help the global South to develop and prosper, to create the conditions for them to prosper. In the meantime, let me say that we must redouble our efforts in the solidarity to the people of Palestine in particular, but also to the people of Russia who have been forced into to carry out military operations to defend their people and to defend practically the world from a total takeover by NATO countries. Let me reiterate my position that Russia has an equal right to security as every other state, and that right is what is causing what is taking place today. Let me also say that we must fight to restore, to defend the international institutions and many of the brave individuals who are there, like Francisca Albanese, that we must defend her for the great work and the contribution that she's making, not only as a job, but the contribution that she's making to our own humanity, saving us from a destruction of what makes us human beings. Once more, let me congratulate all of you who are participants in a fight for a better world, and to say that we must organize, and organize for a better world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hope you can stay with us because we plan to have
Vielen Dank. Thank you, Mr. President.
Discussion afterwards, although we have many speakers still. Ich bitte zum Podium Alessia Ruggeri. Alessia, può venire?
No, now I want to ask Alessia Ruggeri. Sie ist eine Union leader from Italy. She will send a greeting. She's member of the Schiller Institute. She's also member of the new party, the Party of the South.
I speak as a representative of the Southern Italy Party and convey the greetings of my President Orlandino Greco, Mayor of a Calabrian city, thanking the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, LaRouche, for this opportunity. In an increasingly tense geopolitical context, the need for a diplomatic solution should be a priority for everyone, but especially for those who suffer directly from the consequences of the conflict through no fault of their own. Our thoughts go out to the thousands of children who have died in Palestine. Meanwhile, back home, while we continue to talk about rearmament and military strategies, the reality is that Ukrainian people are suffering, European economies struggling, and the risk of a prolonged conflict is becoming increasingly real. A just peace is an abstract concept because each side in a war sees justice from its own point of view. What is needed is a possible peace, a compromise that, while not satisfying everyone, can stop the destruction and suffering. Yet, while people are dying of hunger and citizens are facing unprecedented economic crisis, the focus of European politics seems to be elsewhere. Ursula von der Leyen continues to push for rearmament, for an arms race that only fuels conflict instead of laying the foundation for a solution. In this scenario, the new security and development architecture proposed by the Schiller Institute take on important meaning, not as an instrument of control and domination over weaker countries, but as an opportunity for growth for those who for years have been prey to the civilized countries. Thank you very much.
So, unser nächster Redner ist eine
Our
Rednerin.
next
Sie ist sehr
speaker
bekannt.
is very well known,
Viele von uns
and many from
kennen
us
sehr aus den USA.
know
Sie
her.
ist
It's Diane Sare
der
from USA. She's president of the LaRouche Organisation TLO und ehemalige unabhängige Kandidatin, former independent Senate candidate for the US Senate in New York. She will have her speech in English with the title, Will the Children of Gaza Save America? The Power of Weak Forces.
Thank you. The capacity of man to be cruel to man seems to have no limits, but it actually does. Not because the victims have the power to defend themselves, but because there is a higher principle in the universe which ultimately determines the course of affairs. We've been accustomed to measure our success with arbitrary standards like the number of votes, the number of views, the number of likes, how many houses do you own? But how does the universe measure success? We actually know next to nothing about our own Earth. How is it that we are hanging here 150 million kilometers from a giant ball of molten plasma, rotating around our own axis and orbiting the sun in such a way as to give us the perfect climate for life? We don't even fully understand the relationship between our own orbit, various magnetic fields, and probably as yet undiscovered other factors which have combined to allow us to sit together at this meeting without worrying that we are going to be sucked into the sun at any moment or at any time within the next billion or so years. How many people have considered that understanding this might actually be necessary for our survival? A sailor who knows that the Earth is spherical and rotates on its own axis while rotating about the sun probably will be more likely to reach his intended destination than a sailor who believes the Earth is flat. Why does this matter? What does it have to do with all the suffering in the world that we often feel so powerless to stop? Because we are up against an enemy that believes it can disregard the principles of the creation of the universe, including the nature of man. The shriveled up old billionaires club believes that they can be the global hegemon by controlling the narrative. They believe that they can control our behavior by telling us that the economy is doing great, even if we can't afford to buy a house, that our education system is excellent, even though our children don't know how to read, that driving a gas-powered car and eating meat is causing floods in Texas, and that Israel is just defending itself against unarmed babies in Gaza. So some genius decided to make Israel the issue of the New York City mayoral Democratic primary election. And in the privacy of the voting booth, it became clear that in a city with the largest Jewish population outside of Tel Aviv, Israel, hundreds of thousands of voters do not wish to continue the support of the slaughter of children in Gaza. That in fact, according to the New York Post, thousands of Jewish New Yorkers changed their party affiliation to Democrat merely to be able to cast their vote in the Democratic primary. Did they all vote for Zoran Mamdani? I don't know, but from the results, an awful lot of them did. When Donald Trump defeated the vicarious murderess of Gaddafi in 2016 against the establishment press and party hacks' expectations. You remember they were all crying. LaRouche laughed when I told him they made the Kool-Aid and then they drank it themselves. The controller of the narrative does not win the war. The truth always has the final say, even if we can't predict the exact moment when that will occur. So where does this leave us? Why have I been saying for the last year and a half that the children of Gaza will save the United States? Because a mass strike isn't when people protest an injustice that has been done to them. That gives fire to the conscience who still has one. The slaughter must end. But what about Ukraine? What about Russia? What about Sudan? What about Haiti? What about Jackson, Mississippi? What about mankind doesn't do this to itself ever again? To get there, we have to find a deeper spring based on our historical identity. What was the point of the American Revolution, or better said, the American War of Independence? Was it really just a bunch of old, rich, white guys going on a cruise? Sort of like the billionaires or the billionaires' wives who just went up on a privately owned rocket just for publicity? Did the Mayflower sail to the New World so some perverted nobleman with nothing better to do could rape, pillage, and enslave people? No. There was a brawl going on in Europe between the Venetian, Dutch, British oligarchical families against the poets, musicians, painters, scientists, and let's not forget the sculptors, like Socrates. The debate was over the nature of man. Were we dumb brutes to be ruled over by an arbitrary caste of genetically superior inbred royals? Or was there something precious with unlimited potential, a quality of genius innate in every child? As Socrates demonstrated repeatedly, there was innate quality in every person capable of distinguishing between right and wrong, just and unjust, capable of being educated, and thereby capable of participating in the ongoing development of the universe as a whole, and capable of self-government. Such were the contributions of Nicholas of Cusa, Jeanne d'Arc, Johannes Kepler, Leonardo da Vinci, Leibniz, and also Bach, Beethoven, and Schiller, and many others. The breakthrough of Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton, as informed by Cusa, Leibniz, and Confucius, was to create a form of government which was designed to both promote the economic conditions and the freedom necessary to allow the citizens to develop their individual talents within a society capable of assimilating their discoveries and inventions to uplift and improve their conditions from one generation to the next. These universal principles were expressed in the American Declaration of Independence and Constitution. Was their implementation flawless? No. Even as each of us can imagine a perfect sphere, when it comes to making one in the physical domain, all kinds of obstacles will arise, causing the constructed one to fall short of the image in our mind. That doesn't mean that we should abandon a true principle. So, speaking here as an American, I would like to propose that instead of emulating the barbarian hordes of the Crusades, or the Spanish Inquisition, or the fascist scourge that we defeated 80 years ago, or the modern global Britain of King Charles, that we revive the spirit of the Italian Renaissance, the German classical period, the French École Polytechnique, and the American intellectual tradition. Yes, there is such a thing. And swallow our unjustifiable arrogance and join forces with the global majority whose dedication to the advancement of the human species is in perfect harmony with our true ideals. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Und jetzt haben wir
Now we come to Dr. Jérôme Ravenet from France. A very original speech. With LaRouche as a precursor. And he doesn't say in the beginning what precursor. So.
Expert in China. Und
China-Experte.
Ist auch Experte des Neuen Testaments. Der konnte nicht in Anwesenheit bei uns sein.
Kann nicht persönlich hier sein. Deswegen haben wir ein Video von ihm. Oh, he can't be here.
Chers amis réunis à Berlin, chers amis de l'Institut Schiller, bonjour.
Dear friends of the Schiller Institute, nice day. Lyndon LaRouche showed that a complete diagnosis of the economy required a rethinking of its anthropological foundations, a rethinking of political economy based on the representations of the human being that condition it. He highlighted the rival logic of the dominant paradigm of economic so-called reason, a logic of exclusive and therefore rival interest, the possession of a good by some implies the deprivation of others. The modern language of financial economics is therefore a political language of depredation in human relations. It can be defined as a language of power. It is as a set of discourses designed to justify all the means of prevention and constraint, including military force, that legitimize the domination of some and the submission of others. Indeed, it was the social rise of this financial oligarchy that inaugurated modernity in the world cities, first in Italy, Venice, Genoa, then in Holland, Amsterdam, before continuing on to the city of London and Wall Street. At the forefront of the revolutions that shaped modernity of the process of writing history, this oligarchy gave the impression of fighting the iniquity and brutality of the late feudal order. But has it not rather disguised
them
under a new rationality. The rising financial oligarchy has certainly liberated capitalist forces from their submission to the masters of the past, but the modern world it has engendered has not freed itself from the very model of domination. In the early 16th century, the Machiavellian figures of the lion and the fox prefigured this modern theorization of a paradigm of violence. In the 19th century, the Hegelian dialectic of master and slave gave it the accomplished form of an emblematic parable. Freedom is neither joy nor harmony, but only struggle and conquest, war and combat. It reverses the apparent roles of submission and domination, but without ever abolishing the paradigm of domination itself. Modern rationality is fundamentally marked by and undoubtedly handicapped by a violent anthropology. It is an anthropology of the violence of human relations, reduced to relations of predation, endlessly secreting new knowledge, serving to legitimize and mystify it, such as the all too famous geopolitics, born with Mackinder in the 19th century, or monetarist economics, Milton Friedman in the 20th century. Yet we see that Lyndon LaRouche and his physical economy makes a complete break with this dominant knowledge. We might even say that their radical originality is measured by the strength of the repressive arsenal used to defame and invisibilize them. If the paradigm of modernity has consisted in the martial affirmation of its universalist pretensions, from the conquest of the New World in 1492 to the Wolfowitz Doctrine in 1994, then the LaRouche Doctrine is anti-modern. For LaRouche opposes the paradigm of rivalry with the promise of creativity. He underpins his hope with a rereading of ancient Renaissance and post-Renaissance authors ranging from Plato to Schiller and Nicolaus of Cusa. Spinoza, like Leibniz, was a radical critic of the paradigm of power in the 17th century and a profound theorist of potency. Against power, which is merely a force to prevent and coerce, Spinoza's ethics had distinguished the concept of potency, potentia, as a force to exist and produce effects sensible in the desire to live, conatus. That reason, according to its strengths, can make flourish. Although LaRouche did not mobilize Spinozism, he does use the idea and concept of potency, not only in his dialogue with the physical sciences, but to philosophically ground his approach, for example, through the concept of successful survival, developed in his text of 1999 in defense of common sense. Moreover, we know that Spinozism's theory of power implies a hierarchy of three models of knowledge, culminating in a rational intuition. Yet, LaRouche never ceased to criticize empiricism and logical deductive reason as inferior or limiting modes of knowledge, to emphasize the superior fruitfulness of a creative reason placed at the service of common sense. He exalted this intelligence capable of seeing with the eyes of the future, of immediately grasping the arrangements of compositional relationships likely to help life prosper. It is not my purpose here to examine whether these theses make LaRouche an eligible author for the venerable tradition of Philosophia Perennis that Leibniz discussed in his correspondence with Mr. de Raymond in 1714. We need only point out that it was this rational intuition that enabled Spinoza, like Leibniz and LaRouche, to diagnose the deadly effects of the languages of power in the instituted knowledge of their time, to anticipate the superior efficacy of relations of cooperation over relations of domination. In other words, to grasp the difference in nature and value between the two paradigms of power and potency. This is undoubtedly why LaRouche was able to anticipate and encourage, as early as 1996, the initiative for a global land bridge that prefigured the new Silk Roads project formalized by Beijing in 2014. For the power of common sense creates fruitful forms. By uniting forces that power divides and relying on the principle of least action to multiply their effects, power reaffirms the rights of life. We can't ignore the fact that the Kantian critique had at least temporarily discredited rational intuition. But Kantianism will only be a parenthesis in history if rational calculations succeed in confirming by demonstration what rational intuition has been able to grasp by dazzle, and if science can support metaphysics instead of trying to kill it, and this, it seems to me, is the function of LaRouche's physical economics, which extends immediate intuition through the mediation of arguments nourished by the physical sciences, mathematics, economic statistics, and so on. LaRouche rationalized the energy policy debate, let's not forget, by mathematizing the concepts of free energy and productive platform and assessing their relative power efficiency on the basis of observable facts by measuring the relative population density potential. He has dared to problematize conventional definitions of wealth against the doxa of academic authors, whether liberal or Marxist, by contesting that the ultimate criterion of wealth should be sought in surplus value, exchange value, money supply, and so on, and by reducing it to creation and the principle of least action. In this way, LaRouche encourages political optimism on the basis of a rather Spinozist conception of joy, understood as the index of an increase of our collective. This language of power is inaudible to pessimists, contemptuous human beings, and those tired of living, such as Malthusians, monetarists, transhumanists, thanatophiles, and all of all stripes, and other millenarians. For the paradigm of power that conditions their policies does not allow us to escape from its logic of relations of domination. Power doesn't want just unity, it wants unanimity or hegemony. It is insensitive to the diversity of interests and possible strategies of satisfying them. But it's not a question of fighting it by opposing power with another power, by turning other means of constraint against it. It's not by becoming a well-meaning wolf that we can overcome the wolf in man, but the molting or mutating. It is by settling into the light of the paradigm of compositional or contributory relationships that we can naturally push back the shadow of predatory relationships.
Et une
Finally,
formule de Spinoza
Spinoza's formula sums up the fate of this optimistic anthropology. Homo homini Deus, said man is a god for man. This antonym of the wolf, of course, is the wise man, who has the power to nurture life, who seems in all things the relationship under which men can co-contribute or cooperate to increase their strength and their chances of prospering in this world. At first, such men are rare, but the example of these Spinoza and Leibniz, Jaurès, de Gaulle, and LaRouche, despite their failures, or rather, thanks to the lessons that their ires managed to draw from their failures, are gradually blowing a new wind over history. Through their words and deeds, they have been the indispensable precursors of a paradigm shift to which the BRICS, the new Silk Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the brand new International Organization of Mediation now seems to be giving the shape and consistency of a historical reality. By definition, the fate of a forerunner is to have been right too soon and to bear the pain. But this pain is not in vain, because it is the pain of childbirth. It is a foretaste of the joy of a springtime to come. Thanks for listening and wishing you a wonderful conference. Have a nice day. No.
Wir danken Herrn Ravenet.
Wir remercie.
Wir kommen zum nächsten Redner. Und wir haben Herrn Achim Bonatz aus Deutschland, der Vizepräsident des Ostdeutschen Kuratorium von Verbänden ist, der eine unserer Sponsoren. Guten Tag. Ja. Guten Tag. Bitte einen Applaus zu unseren Sponsoren. Und er wird uns, also sein Vortrag trägt den Titel 5% des BIP für die Rüstungskonzerne, eine Umverteilung des nationalen Reichtums, eine Überforderung der Gesellschaft. Bitte sehr.
Herzlichen Dank. Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ich bedanke mich bei Frau LaRouche, dass ich vor diesem Gremium im Rahmen der Konferenz des Schiller-Instituts meine Gedanken zur kommerziellen Seite von Kriegen äußern darf. Und habe als Einstieg gewählt ein Zitat von Friedrich Schiller.
To begin, I've chosen a quote from Friedrich Schiller from Cheminade. The best merchant is war. It turns iron into gold. Schiller wrote. At the latest NATO summit on June 25th, 2025, this summit decided to spend 5% of NATO countries' GDP on armaments.
Mein Mathematiklehrer in der Abi-Zeit meinte des Öfteren, man darf nicht Äpfel mit Birnen vergleichen.
Now, my math teacher in high school often said that you can't compare apples with oranges. So this is being done deliberately here to deceive the population. I don't hear anything for the moment. That came back. So this puts massive pressure on all other budget items, especially social spending.
Im konkreten Fall Russland genannt, welches vorgeblich 28/29 die NATO-Staaten angreifen wolle. Ich möchte schon wieder ein Zitat einflechten.
External enemies, and in this specific case of Russia. I'd like to quote Karl Peter Frühling, a German philosopher, who said, quote, power, lust, and fear have always been the grave diggers of freedom and thus also of peace, end of quote. In Germany, GDP amounted to 4.31 trillion euros in 2024. 5% of this makes 215 billion euros, which Germany is supposed to, little by little, spend on military argument within a single year. The sound has been cut again. Here. I'm sorry, I can't hear anything.
Mit Magnum Cum Laude Abschluss
okay,
habe ich die Korrelation zwischen
So he has made a correlation
und möchte Sie auch da verschonen, weil innerhalb des Staates gibt es sehr das möchte ich Ihnen hier
no, possible in the current state.
Schaut man auf Dänemark, welches am 1. Juli 25 beschlossen hat.
We can see what was taken on decided on July. Toby. This works for him. No. Gotta find where he is.
sondern diejenigen, die Deutschland mit dem Zweiten Weltkrieg schon einmal
who once already put Germany with the Second War into blood and catastrophe. These warmongers, it's not enough to have good words. We, the German people, city some years back, and demand very loudly the stepping down of this government. This could be an appeal to everyone from this conference. In the end, I would say, in the name of the Christians in our club, that the man is not the enemy of man. Mention first the part of the Bible with the Sermon of the Mount, where it's the basics for living together happily. We are very happy about the choice of theme for this international conference of the Schiller Institute, especially that it ends not with a question mark, but with an exclamation mark. To say that man is a wolf to man is terrible. One, because the idea that you want to hide your own shortcoming towards your fellow man, and to the second, it's the capitulation before the wolf man instead of to go against aggression and aggressive people. So for this necessary resistance, we have to see the background of conflicts, to be able to explain them and to mobilize the people and make them sure against the pro-aggressive propaganda. Fortunately, the Chinese policy is the best teacher. She goes to the oppressed people and is sincere. And the more aggressive are the trying to win back those countries from the other side, the less they are be trusted. In the result, the power of the peaceful China is seeming passively is growing. And I cite the St. Matthew about China is not using all of its resources while the others are overstretching themselves, even though the other side doesn't even want to fight. And on the small, I saw that very people who don't know each other at all are able to help each other and do this. They like to do this. The man is a social being, strong and happy when it's in solidarity. I thank you.
Danke, Frau Pretorius. Lass uns für das Demo mobilisieren. Wo vielleicht beim September diese Regierung schon gefallen ist, wer weiß. Unser nächster Redner, Eine Ankündigung. Leider bin ich bin informiert, dass Internet funktioniert nicht und deshalb haben wir keine Übersetzung. Ich hoffe, dass die bald wiederhergestellt wird.
We have troubles with the internet, unfortunately. Our next speaker is Wolfgang Effenberger, former officer of the Bundeswehr, author, and he will talk about the subject of international law and the so-called value-based order of the United States. Mr. Effenberger, please. Thanks for the invitation. Ladies and gentlemen, despite their differences, international law and law of nations are often used synonymously in everyday language. International law, which takes precedent over the law of nations, includes central principles as sovereignty and equality of states, prohibition of violence, and human rights and humanitarian law of war. It encompasses international treaties such as the UN Charter or the Geneva Convention. The general legal principles of international law are set out in the Statute of the International Court of Justice. To enforce these principles, reprisals or multilateral measures such as sanctions, exclusion from international organizations, or in cases military action are usually employed, often under the guise of collective security. Since compliance with international law depends on voluntary international cooperation, the United Nations was founded shortly after before the end of the Second World War. Representatives of 51 states met in San Francisco to prepare the founding on the basis of the Charter of the United Nations. The Charter committed the participating nations to be peaceful settlement of all international disputes on the basis of international and official equality. In future, all those forces against the integrity and independence of other states was to be renounced. In 1795, the then 71-year-old philosopher Immanuel Kant had published his work about eternal peace. In it, he formulated the following prerequisites for a peaceful coexistence: that no unjust peace should be concluded that contains the seeds of future conflicts, such as the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War, that national territories cannot be exchanged or acquired, that standing armies must be disbanded, and that, and this is important, no state debt should be incurred in relation to external state affairs. World War I, for example, could only be waged with massive support from the assault through loans from Wall Street over a period of years, and since the debt securities would have become worthless if the intent had been defeated, the United States were forced to enter the war in 1917. Another core statement of Kant is, no state shall interfere by force in the constitution or governments of another state. This prohibition of violent intervention is reflected in the UN Charter. Furthermore, mutual confidence in future peace must not be made impossible. According to Kant, the best form of governance for avoiding arbitrary acts is a civil constitution that is as republican as possible. And on the international level, a federalism of free states, since any kind of world state leads to despotism. Kant's principles have found their way into the UN Charter. Unfortunately, however, they are largely ignored in reality, especially by the Western protectorate of the USA. There are numerous documented examples of the US disregarding international law. The most important are war against Yugoslavia in 1999. For the first time, without a UN mandate, the US bombarded mainly the civilian population and infrastructure for 8 days, using banned uranium ammunition. Since then, that was a turn of the times. Iraq invasion 2003 based on lies about weapons of mass destruction. Recognition of Israeli sovereignty over occupied territories under President Trump. In Syria, US troops have been operating for years without any basis in international law. Detention without trials or use of torture, for example, in Guantanamo Bay or Iraqi prisons. Rejection and circumvention of international jurisdiction. The US has passed national laws to prevent its citizens from prosecution. Particularly well known is the Den Haag Invasion Act. Binding resolutions of the UN Security Council, such as those on the ceasefire in Palestine, are ignored or blocked by the US. Arbitrary detention and extrajudicial executions. The US usually justifies its action despite criticism under international law by referring to its own national interests and the right to self-defense. This is often done using vague wording intended to give the appearance of legitimacy under international law. Legitimacy of its own actions is usually not based on specific norms of international law, but on political interest. Arguments based on international law are either only formally invoked or ignored altogether. Unilateral measures such as sanctions or military action are justified on the ground of combating terrorism, preventing the proliferations of weapons of mass destruction, or protecting human rights. These arguments serve to protect the US actions as morally and politically necessary, even if they are not tenable under international law. US exceptionalism provides the ideological basis for the US not to be bound by international law or the UN Charter, but to establish and enforce its own value-based rules, if necessary, unilaterally and against the resistance of the international community. The US sees itself historically and ideologically as an exceptional nation with a special mission. For this, it derives its self-image of being bound by international agreements only as long as they serve its own interests. The US regards its moral and political standards, which does not adhere to itself, as universal and non-negotiable. Behind the mantra of the rules-based order, or rather disorder, lies the US claim to hegemony, which Nobel Prize laureate Barack Obama clearly articulated in its West Point speech of May 28, 2024. I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being, but what makes us exceptional is not our ability to defy international norms and the rule of law, it is our willingness to affirm them through our actions. And that's what they do all the time. Obama's orders for the targeted killing of people by drones are particularly serious. The US president as the nation's supreme judge and executioner. Just today, days after the terrorist attack of the Twin Towers in Manhattan, the Pentagon placed 7 countries on a list which were then to be attacked by the US, and those governments were to be destroyed over the next 5 years. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, Lebanon, Somalia, and Sudan. Just 27 days after the attack. Without any evidence of involvement, Afghanistan was engulfed in war, a war which lasted over 20 years and left only scorched earth behind. In total, the US policy has cost more than 20 million of lives since 1945, with around 200 major interstate wars and civil wars, wars of liberation, revolutions and counter-revolutions, coup d'etats, guerrilla and counter-guerrilla actions, not to mention the refugee flows that continue to this day. In the US strategy paper of October 22, US President Biden named the following as the main objectives: reducing the threat posed by China and Russia, excluding any renunciation of a nuclear first strike, and building a lasting advantage globally. How does a nation that claims to have a permanent advantage live in peace with others? In the briefing of the US Congress Scientific Service from November 22, it states, in order to prevent regional hegemony in Eurasia, it appears that many US military operations in World War I and World War II, as well as numerous military war missions and everyday operations since World War II, have been carried out to a considerable extent in support of this goal. When we look at the current wars and conflicts around the globe today, the fault lines surrounding World War I are clearly visible. According to German philosopher Oswald Spengler, this war began as early as 1911 with the occupation of Morocco, cities Fez and Rabat by France, Italy's war against the Ottoman Empire in Tripolitania, British activities in Egypt and Persia, Japan's occupation of Korea. The two Balkan wars followed in 1912 and 1930. Almost all of today's trouble spots are located on these fault lines. At the center of Europe at the time was the booming trading nations of Germany with large export surpluses, a thorn in the side of the declining British colonial empire. Today, the rising power is China, which is being targeted by the declining superpower USA. The parallels are obvious. In September 2014, the Pentagon adopted the document Win in a Complex World 2020 to 2040, which prepares US armed forces for war against China and Russia. Overall, it is sad to say that international law is increasingly being disregarded, people are being deceived and lied to, conflicts are being fueled rather than resolved, and weapons of mass destruction are being kept ready for use instead for being dismantled. And all this in the name of humanity. Measures to build trust are hardly ever taken. This is precisely why we should remember Kant's principles. After the fate of the League of Nations and the corruption of the UN, both born in the spirit of war, we need a community of nations formed in the spirit of peace that does not serve unipolar power interests. The UN system was established under false pretenses and has been abused, rendering it irreparable. The UN must be replaced by a contemporary organization that is not dominated by the US. This is by no means naive, but essential if we want not to perish in general aggressive chaos. Kant's arguments remains relevant to this day. Therefore, perpetual peace remains a fundamental text of the world peace movement. A unipolar world will always end in despotism. Mutual respect among states only allows for a multipolar world order. And I'm calling for peace in freedom through truth. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Effenberger. And now we will have Major Florian Pfaff from Germany. He is speaker of the group Das Darmstädter Signal. This is an organization of former and active members of the Bundeswehr. The Darmstädter Signal has received a medal from the International League of Human Rights. And Major A.D. Pfaff will tell us about peace and security, why we need a different policy. Please. Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you for everybody who are here. I don't see any empty seats. Also, outside people were standing around, sitting on the stage. So this makes courage. And thank you very much for the organizers who should receive this white rose. I wanted to say open things. I was accused of not telling the truth. And on Tuesday, there was a talk because administrative use will not work. You cannot say we will leave people in the school who can say about the truth. There are two views on peace. The one is we make full spectrum dominance. We dominate the whole world. This is the variant with weapons. And the second view is that's there was interruption in the technique. The question is, can you understand that? So I even can understand the first one. If I have weapons and I accumulate them, then you can make peace. But this is the premise is that I don't have to take arms to myself and attack people. This premise is not fulfilled. And the second one is in the peace movement without weapons, you can live with some for a while. But if you have an attacker like Hitler or the US, then sometimes at some time people will attack this country. Maybe you can have a war without nuclear weapons. So I can understand both views. I understand everything for the Russians and so forth, but I cannot agree to the crimes of both sides. And I've repeated again, what is about the weapons? I was in Deckendorf yesterday. I was starting my tour from there because I had to give a lecture yesterday afternoon. That was already in the morning. And this was in the room. People didn't know about each other. I only knew one of them. And among them, they were not known. And people, one person took out a knife. And even then, people felt secure. So people who are for weapons, so there was insecurity. Here, this morning knife, I say, it's not the case that people were there because of the knives. but they were secure because of the knife. So it's not the case of with or without weapons, but also, as Effenberger has said, so it's what is too important is it's a mind, it's a thinking of the people who own these weapons or not. It doesn't Mark Milley had said it's the same. It doesn't play any role which weapons we deliver to Ukraine. It only makes sense that I take a theory. I take over the world with weapons with the condition that the others cannot take over the world. But the other thing is that we kill all the scientists and military people from the other side. The same thing doesn't work on the school. And people there, the pupils are normally not weaponized with knives and so forth. But if there's no trouble coming out, will come out the parents. Here, if you have a knife, you can defend yourself. But then they will say that they don't take knives with to the school. This is a rhetoric question. You will not say, and then we weaponize both sides with knives or revolvers, but this doesn't make sense. The NATO actually said that. Mr. Merz said we will have the strongest army in the world, in Europe. So the armament expenses must be increased. But the other question is where the soldiers should come from. But the NATO has 1999 led a classical attack war. So I say this is a crime organization. So attack is a crime. The same with the Bundeswehr is the same. And I was ordered then they said when I attacked them, I was first went to the psychiatry, and then they ended in court. But they said Pfaff has a right. But the Bundeswehr said it doesn't matter if you cannot shoot down airplanes. We don't care about that either. And then the defense minister said this doesn't interest me. But we will do that all over again. Otherwise, we cannot lead any war. And they have to break law to wage wars. And my concern is that Mr. Schneiderhan, who have to offer something like that, that the British with the US and made in the Iraq, he must fear to end of his life that he is accused of that. Because when the state attorney actually can be free to do that. Also, the minister president, who was also accused, so something like that in Afghanistan, we can try that. We attack wars can do, but we should not try it actually. But he said we can do it, but.
Also ich komme jetzt zum Schluss aus Zeitgründen, obwohl ich den ganzen Abend hier noch vortragen könnte. In meinen Augen ist das bedenklich, dass man solche Dinge nicht mehr offen diskutieren will.
I think it's questionable that people cannot when people who call themselves anti-fascists use fascist methods to silence the opposition, or that you prevent people from going to other countries. In Italy, because we fear that they could give speeches against Germany. And now they say, how do we solve this? And the Schiller Institute does this, and everyone who acts in the same spirit is, after all, it's going to be the Chinese and the Russians who are going to solve these problems. All the other countries, except for the NATO, the 15% who support, and therefore the other 85% will support us and not them. And I have a white rose to give in honor of this activity.
Mache ich weiter. Thank you, Mr. Pfaff. Now we come slowly to the end. I think we have some time for discussion. Our last speaker is from France. This is Colonel Jacques Hogarth, former officer of the French Legion and of French special units. He will talk about words of a concerned soldier.
Bonjour à tous. Je suis
Good day to all of you.
Présent à cette conférence.
I'm present at your conference at a
Hallo
distance,
zusammen, ich
as we
nehme
say
an dieser
today,
Konferenz, wie man heute
invited by
sagt, aus der
Jacques
Ferne
Cheminade and
teil,
the
auf
Schiller
Einlass von Jacques
Institute.
Cheminade und dem
I'm
Schiller-Institut.
very happy to see that in this gathering is my dear friend Wolfgang Effenberger, whom I knew in Belgrade in circumstances a little bit similar at the conference of the Forum for a Legal World.
Ce que j'ai à dire est très simple en tant qu'ancien officier de l'armée française.
What I have to say is very simple. I served in the French services in Africa since my early days. I traveled extensively in Africa. I had already been there with my father, who was also an officer in the French army, in Senegal, Ivory Coast, Mauritania, Djibouti, and so on. And it had a big impact on me. And then I was myself a career for 26 years in the foreign region, and then in the special forces, where I ended my career, actually prematurely, because of the involvement of the NATO operation in Kosovo in 1999. And that was the reason why I took stock and left the French army. I left this world that I loved. It was my family, the French army. I was like a fish in water there. But I decided to leave because I had just seen in Kosovo, I had become aware of it already in Rwanda in 1994, that the world was changing. There was the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the disappearance of the USSR in 1991, and the situation had changed. And then in Rwanda in 1994, I discovered that our best enemy, in quotes, was ultimately the United States of America. So I began to understand the full reality of real imperialism, of this fierce desire to establish hegemony over the world in a strictly unipolar world where the United States would play something like the role of a world policeman. So 5 years later, in 1999 in Kosovo, as a field commander, I discovered NATO. I had already known it a bit in September of 1998, or more precisely from the time when people in Western Europe began to talk about Kosovo and the tragedy that was playing out there for the Albanian population, victims of a genocide. Since people were already talking about genocide, purportedly perpetuated by the inhabitants, the army, and the institutions of Serbia. So I did a little research before I went there with a particular state of mind, which was a kind of, well, permanent questioning about the reality of what was hidden behind the mirror, so to speak. And then I discovered it firsthand, first in Macedonia and then in Kosovo, since I was in command of the French Special Forces under British command. And it didn't take me long to understand the duplicity of our British allies. In reality, they were playing their own card, which was in fact the American card, because the British, in my view, are the best possible proxies for the Americans. They are the ideal armed arms within NATO for American interests. And I discovered concretely, although I had been somewhat forewarned of it previously, that our interests, those of France, French interests, were not a concern of NATO. So that made me realize on the ground that we were in a false position, since we were coming to help an Albanian rebellion, supported moreover by a certain number of foreign powers, European, Germany, for example, but also France, and of course by the British and the Americans. This rebellion had been considered until 1997 as a terrorist movement, and it was included on the list of terrorists by the US. But suddenly it passed into the camp of one of our best allies. I saw the actions, and I had to finally confront my British leaders on the ground in Kosovo during a certain number of somewhat dramatic episodes, which I had the opportunity to talk about in a small book that I wrote when I got back, called Europe Died in Pristina. And why I said that Europe died in Pristina is that I brought a testimony with a strong title, which was in fact the negative of what I had heard from Bernard Kouchner, the head of who was then the French foreign minister, and who had been appointed by the European Union as governor of Kosovo after the break between the province of Kosovo and the Serbian motherland. And Mr. Kouchner had exclaimed, "Oh, Europe was born in Pristina." But I thought exactly the opposite, and that's why I wanted to write my testimony and to give it this title. Now, Europe is the European Union on the one hand, but it's also a continent to which belong countries like Russia and Serbia. But while they are strictly speaking not part of it from a continental point of view, they are stakeholders. So the greater Europe that I dream of is that of General de Gaulle, the Europe from the Atlantic to the Urals. And that Europe would make sense because it would be a balanced Europe between two poles. To the west, one pole would be France, and to the east, Russia. I believe the words of Chateaubriand in his time, or General de Gaulle a little later, who more or less took them up. When Russia and France are allies, are close, well, Europe does well. And when they are divided, Europe does badly. And we can see this perfectly realized today. Now, I think that Europe has a role to play in the world, both in Asia and Africa, and in what we call the global south, And I think that of France, of course, that's not the France of today. It's quite a bit different from that. But a France which is faithful to its identity, without complex, without arrogance, but a France, well, proud of itself, proud of its Christian roots shared with other European countries, in which they assume peacefully, quietly, by bringing to the world the strength of its culture, the strength of its humanism, the strength of its generosity, and its capacity for commitment. There you have it. This is an ideal France that doesn't yet exist precisely at the present time. That's obvious. But we're fighting every day so that the face of France becomes again what it has been for centuries. Thank you very much.
So, ich habe zwei Ankündigungen.
I have to make two announcements.
Zuerst, vor dem Konzert,
first of all,
das Chor muss hier
the
18 Uhr
chorus has to meet in this room to assemble in this room at 18:15. And the good news is that the kitchen is still open and you can still go to where we had lunch, you can have something to eat. And before we start a discussion round, I have a message from Ukraine, an important message by Natalia Vitrenko. She's a former she's an economic expert and she supports LaRouche's ideas. And she's in Ukraine and her party was banned, the Socialist Progressive Party, and she's being persecuted by the government, which started a defamation campaign by medias in Ukraine who are following the regime. There are only regime-following media in Ukraine, and she was attacked in a way that it is not too much to say that we have to fear that the regime wants to eliminate her. And she has sent us a short message where the reports what has been done to her party. And she's talking about the situation. This message is in English.
Internet schon wiederhergestellt wird. So, es wird übersetzt.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
dear conference participants,
dear conference,
friends, dear Helga. Greetings on the opening of this very important conference. I wish you success in its work. I greatly regret that I cannot take part and address the conference myself. I highly value the work of the Schiller Institute and its conferences as unique platforms for the free exchange of opinions among people from different continents on the pressing problems of planet Earth. The legacy of Lyndon LaRouche gives us a technology for conceptualizing the problems of the world financial system and the possibility of proposing a life-saving alternative. I am grateful to the Schiller Institute and its leader, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, personally, for paying close attention to the tragedy of the war in Ukraine and to what has happened to me. I would like my friends, above all, to know the truth directly from me. our Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine, PSPU, was unlawfully banned in 2022 in violation of the presumption of innocence, the rule of law, and the fundamental human rights of free speech, freedom of association, and freedom for lawful political opposition. These rights are all guaranteed under the Constitution of Ukraine and the European Convention on Human Rights. The basis of our party's political program was the Declaration of State Sovereignty of Ukraine, adopted by the lawful Parliament of Ukraine on the 16th of July 1990. The support of the people of Ukraine in two referenda, those of the 17th of March and 1st of December 1991, gave that declaration the highest judicial force in our country. Our people defined neutrality and the nuclear weapons-free status as the basis of our independence. The international community recognized Ukraine as having precisely such sovereignty. It is true that our party proposed an alternative economic and social model and alternative solutions for humanitarian issues. But our party proposed to achieve those goals exclusively by peaceful means. In the process of banning the PSPU, neither the Ministry of Justice nor the Security Service of Ukraine presented in court a single piece of evidence that the party had plans for a violent overthrow of the government. Thus, the PSPU was banned in gross violation of the Constitution of Ukraine and of European standards of democracy. The European Court of Human Rights accepted the PSPU's complaint about its ban for consideration. This was 2.5 years ago. But unfortunately, the case has not yet been heard. 11 parties have been banned in Ukraine, parties advocating peace. The ban of our party under martial law and while the war is going on made it possible for the mass media, pro-government politicians and officials to fabricate slanders against me with impunity, circulate them in the media, and instigate physical attacks on me. I am grateful for the articles in EIR about how I have been slandered in Ukraine, a country I have never abandoned nor hidden from. I can confirm that the facts and analysis in these articles are true and precise. Thank you again for them. Dear conference participants, best wishes for the work of the conference. Indeed, man should be a friend to man. Only then will our planet Earth, so divinely beautiful, survive. Natalia Vitrenko, People's Deputy of Ukraine 1995-2002, Doctor of Economics, candidate for the presidency of Ukraine in 1999 and 2004, leader of the unlawfully banned Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine. So I would invite all of our speakers, if I counted correctly, it's 7 of them, and we have 7 chairs, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yes. And I think we would take questions from the audience now for about 20 minutes. Bitte sehr. Aber ich habe Englisch gesprochen. Ich wiederhole das auf Deutsch. Ich lade alle Redner zum Podium für die Diskussionsrunde. Nee, j'ai parlé. When I was in Paris, I improvised. Wer fehlt? Herr Bonatz, sind die da? Jacques Cheminade fehlt. Odile, you want to represent him? Oh, he's coming, okay. No, der kommt. He's coming, right? No? Okay. Haben wir schon Fragen vom Publikum? Oder sollte ich eine Frage stellen zuerst?
Are there questions from the audience or should I pose a question?
Haben wir eine Frage? Okay, bitte.
Ja,
Is there a question?
Danken, dass ich heute hier
I want to thank you that
Schiller-Institut teilnehmen kann.
that I can participate in the Schiller Institute conference. It's very interesting. For 60 years, I have worked for 60 years in Russia in the East Bloc, and I experienced live what is going on, and in contrast to what we know today. I want to say something provocatively. There's a big meeting of the critical pensioners, and the youth is missing, I guess. Back in the 1970s, there were powerful demonstrations against the war in Vietnam. Where is the youth? When we are dealing with the future, when it's nobody seems to be interested in that. These are the old ones, 2,000 people, probably 4,000 men at Easter time, but this is it. The citizens are sitting on their behind because it's not burning. In individual discussions, this will be expressed, but how can become people organized that we can stop this fascism? How can we admit that Nazis are marching through Berlin? How can we admit that under police protection they can demonstrate for lynch justice against Russians? How can we admit that fascistic propaganda against Russia is being done like against the Jews at the time? The Russians are not allowed to work in Russia and in science and culture and so forth. Even the accounts are blocked, like in the Jews in the 30s. Nobody is standing up. Everybody runs with it. This is a problem I have. How do you see that people are finally brought to recognize, to see the problems that we are going to the street?
Darf ich dazu gleich antworten? Das sind ja zwei Fragen.
Maybe I add. The question is why the youth are not on the street, wherever. The second question is what do we do to change that? Is that the real way So the first question can be answered. The youth have a TV set at home and have other entertainment possibilities. They have a computer with some ego shooter on that. And these media, especially the computer and the computer with the ego shooter, and also the school where the teachers are also infected. I have declared that other people should be taken away from the schools, but the media tell us that we are the good ones. In the Iraq war, the 4 laws were very successful. The first 3 have been popped, and the third one, the fourth one stayed over. So the second thing was that there were chemical weapons in Iraq, but this was popped. Mr. Powell also said this was a lie, and then the media have brought a false lie, and this is contained until today, like the pandemic, which is still active. But the pandemic was only a worse flu, and this has been maintained so far. And then they say we are the good ones, and like against the Russians. While Bucha was not the Russians, but this were the Ukrainians. But the media report that this were the Russians, and the youth are believing that they are sitting in front of the TV, and they have a neighbor, and one of them is a NATO adherer. They say he says that the media are lying, but he really doesn't know about anything. Then somehow he knows his worldview is going broke. So we will not become enemies. So, but I have to tell him he will never be an enemy because because I have a different opinion. But this is also being taught for people who is not against us, not for us. But I'm a pessimist. What to do about it? Especially we should wait until the gasoline is two euros and other things are more expensive. Yesterday I was in Herborn giving a lecture. Now I'm here. If that is good, I don't know. Probably in the DDR it also took a long time. Much more I cannot say about that.
I think Diane wanted, and then Professor Rastbeen, and then Herr Effenberger. Okay?
Can I be heard? Yes. Okay. Well, I wanted to address that. I think it's a little bit different, and maybe everyone here did not follow what I was speaking about with the election in New York City. The Democratic nominee for mayor, Zoran Mamdani, is a Muslim immigrant who was born in Uganda to parents from India. And I've met him. I'm not endorsing a candidate, but what happened in the mayoral race, and this is New York City, where the demonstrations on the campuses have gotten quieter, as Norman Finkelstein said, because the students went home and their parents said, "We have spent $200,000 on your degree and you cannot lose it by protesting," and they had big fights, but it is there under the surface. And on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which, as people may know, is a very large Jewish population, what we are finding in the street is that the people are very inspired by the students. So somehow in this mayoral race, the issue, and here is a city that's falling apart and you can't afford to live there, and they're putting mentally ill people in Rikers Island prison because they don't have the mental hospitals, and it's a disaster. But they made the issue Israel, partly because of Cuomo, and there was a debate of the 9 candidates for mayor, and they said, it's a lightning round. If you win, which is the first foreign country you will visit? And they said, Israel, Israel, Israel. After my 4th trip to Israel, then I will go to Ukraine. And then they got to Mamdani, and he said, I stay in New York. I'm elected to deal with the problems of New York. So he won the Democratic primary, and it shook everything to its foundation. And now they are showing polls also that in the MAGA base of Trump, because he won the election because people are sick of war. So his base is shattering, it is fracturing, and you have people like a very tough congresswoman from Georgia named Marjorie Taylor Greene, who crisscrossed the country, Gulf of America, rah-rah, but when he started bombing Iran, she put a long post. She said, we are your base. I fought for you to win this election so that you would not invade another country on behalf of a country which has its own nuclear weapons. And so there is a different process. And I think what we urgently need is to be there with the solutions, because I think this fascist order is going to crack. I went to the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee meeting, and you know who I met there? I met Medea Benjamin at CPAC. Why was she there? Because we discover that the so-called conservatives supporting Trump among the young people, they oppose the genocide in Gaza. So it is not at all what it appears, but the question is, when this breaks, can we create the conditions where people move in a positive direction of an entirely new and just system, as the BRICS represents, as our history represents, or are we just going to have a collapse or possibly thermonuclear war? But I think we really are in a revolutionary moment. I don't think the young people don't get it. I think they do. They don't see a way to move.
Diane, c'est ce qui a été déjà posé la question. Mon avis, c'est quelque
Go
chose
to the person
d'essentiel.
who posed the question.
Si vous permettez, je vais
If you
lancer
allow,
dans cette perspective.
I'm going to enter into this
Produit aujourd'hui
perspective.
dans les sociétés
What's happening in our
orientales et
societies
occidentales,
today, in
c'est
the
le
West
manque de
and the
confiance.
Eastern societies,
À
is a lack
l'intérieur
of
de chaque
confidence.
société, les
Within
partis
each
politiques, ils ont
society,
perdu
the
leur
political
crédibilité.
parties have lost
À
their
l'extérieur,
reliability,
les
or
pouvoirs
they're
publics
no longer trusted.
et aussi les pays occidentaux,
There
aussi, ils
are
ont perdu
Western
déjà leur
countries
crédibilité.
which have also
Entre les
lost
deux
their
sociétés,
credibility,
intérieure et extérieure,
and
Occident et
between
Orient,
the
il n'y a pas de
two
confiance.
societies,
À
inward and
l'intérieur des
outward,
Nations Unies,
in the East
nous
and in the
avons le même
West,
problème,
you
c'est-à-dire
can see that there are similar problems.
auprès de la population mondiale, la légitimité
Faced
des
with the
Nations
world
Unies, il y a
population
un point d'interrogation.
and the United Nations,
À qui il faut
there
faire
is
confiance?
still a question
Qui
mark
sont ces
as
gens-là
to
qui
who
font la
should
guerre?
have our
Qui
trust,
sont ces gens-là
who
qui
is
font des
going to
terrorismes?
stop war,
Et ces
who is
terrorismes
committing
sont financés
terrorism.
par qui?
Who is
Vous avez la
financing
question.
these
Et
terrorists?
la réponse,
These are the
vous pouvez
questions, and
poser
the
la
answers
même réponse. Est-ce que Ben Laden a été
the answers
financé
are
par
the
les
same.
Américains?
Was bin
Est-ce que
Laden financed
moi-même
by
Ben
the
Laden a
Americans?
été
Was the same bin
exécuté
Laden
et tué par les
executed
Américains?
and killed by the
Est-ce
Americans?
qu'actuellement le président
Right now,
de,
is the
de la
president of
Syrie qui était leadership
Syria,
du Taliban,
who was the head
était
of the
leader
Taliban
des talibans, Al-Qaïda, était
and
chef
the
dirigeant du
Al-Qaeda,
terrorisme?
and was the chief head of the terrorists, is he not being welcomed by the Americans? These are questions to which people are demanding answers. So can the United Nations provide the answers? Can the political parties and civic society respond to these questions? And the universities, do we find the answers? But the reality is different. In reality, there is no war between Palestine and Jews. There's a war of occupation. And that occupation, people are asking, how can it be legitimate? The Americans say that's what they want to have. They want to have, they want to be able to impose their will on the international community. They want to impose their desires so that the world, the international world, be managed according to their own tastes. They want to decide on themselves which groups are going to rule, how, what trade policies they'll have, how they'll live, etc. So I don't want to go into this too much in depth at the end of this panel, so I'll stop now. But I'm at your disposal if you want to discuss this further. Thank you.
Man hat mir gesagt, dass Herr Ramotar ist wieder mit uns. Ich würde ihn
Mir wurde
jetzt begrüßen. Hello, Herr
I was
Ramotar.
told
Welcome back to us.
President Ramotar is back online with us.
Question and answers. And before I give the microphone to Mr. Effenberger, whom I promised he will answer that question.
Yeah,
I tell you what the question was, and maybe you want also to say what you think after Mr. Effenberger. The question was from the audience, and it was something like this. There are not many young people in this conference, and he wonders why young people are not taking the street like they were doing at the time of the peace movement in the 80s. So I think this was this.
Yes.
Das ist im Prinzip, was Sie gesagt haben.
I think maybe one of the main problems of why we're not seeing the mass demonstration is that the repression in the developed capitalist world in Europe and North America were never so great as it is today. That people are banned from universities, students are banned from universities, and they are jailed. So those who are from another country that are being expelled, and the repression is getting greater and greater in these countries. And that, in my view, contributes to the fact that you're not seeing as much demonstration. Even locally within these countries, any type of demonstration is now being harshly attacked by the police and other military forces within the society. So I think the repression is one. The second reason, I think, is on our part, we have not been able to, because of the propaganda that exists in the society, a lot of progressive ideas are not really getting out as much. Alternative views are not getting out as much into the among young people, and they are actually deprived of some of the education that some of us had. The demonstration that was spoken about Vietnam and so forth, we had and I think that we are also experiencing the collapse of the socialist countries in Europe, Eastern Europe that existed there. Those effects, I think, are underestimated, that the impact they had on the peace movement, the alternative that they were offering, all of those things have disappeared, and it's much more difficult now to mobilize and organize people, while the forces that are for war have become more entrenched within the system itself and trying to deprive them. So I think our task, we have the possibility of not only the mainstream media, but you have alternative media, and we should try to think about how much we can use it to spread progressive ideas, patriotic ideas, internationalist ideas, emphasize international solidarity. The idea, for instance, the way I think that my struggle here in Guyana is part of a global struggle. And any step forward that we make here, I think we make a contribution to your development as well. And we support any type of struggle abroad because we think that that will help our struggle here as well. That kind of education needs to be revived in the new situation that we have in order that we can get a more active population, and we see all of our struggles as being a common type of struggle for a better world. Thank you. Thank you.
Stellen können, weil viele von uns ja Kinder, aber zumindest vielleicht auch schon Enkelkinder haben, die in dem Alter sind, wo sie denken anfangen können. Und ich werde auch von besorgten Eltern
many have children who are old enough, and now the question is, what do I tell my 14-year-old son or daughter? The class is structured in a way that when the children question the teachers, then the parents are you the teachers are fully on the side of the state because they want to keep their status as a state employee. They don't want to lose their job, and the children feel this, and a concerned child, it feels if something is not true, and then the result is that they withdraw into a fake world. There's no religion anymore, no church that is credible, perhaps a sports club or music. So this is lacking. So the children cannot escape this. And this was made worse by Corona when the children were isolated. And I'm asked by concerned parents if I tell my child we're threatened with a war, if he talks in his class about this, then they get into trouble. They get into trouble with the school and perhaps more. And they're all dependent, and they all have to expect sanctions. And the sanctions are very strong. I know professors who lost their professorship and can't teach anymore. And if they can't be thrown out, the students are told, if you continue to study with them, you won't get a diploma. So they get told, go to these professors, and then the students go to where the career is. This starts in the schools, it goes into the universities, and everyone surrenders to this. And the few people who have the courage to protest, and most people just say, I do my work and I withdraw into a fake world. And the problem that you have today, and the same problem was 200 years ago, there was Schopenhauer, and he said, you can't do anything against stupidity, you have to protect yourself from it. If stupidity becomes too big, you have to talk like them, but you have to think differently. I don't know if that is the right solution, but for the children, it is very, very difficult. And people from my job, the 25 friends who, from all the decades, there's only one who enjoys my articles and complains that my articles don't get a resonance, but the others go along. They know me since I'm 18. They know my character. They know it, but it doesn't help. And it is difficult. So we have to be subtle. And then I think about Pareto. If their collective things are done, 20% will do the work and 80% will. Pareto got in trouble with Stalin because Stalin didn't believe those numbers. But if we, according to Pareto, the 20%, we will have reached and achieved quite a lot. And we have to get people to think, and then steady drop will crack the stone. It is not easy in this today's world. But the young people, they feel that something is wrong. He can't talk to his parents, he can't talk to his teachers, and he knows he has to be careful. Sorry, it's late. We have not much time left. I want to encourage people. Looking at the youth, with our group against the war, we're active since 25 years, twice a week. And the last 3 years, we have more than 30 groups of young people who came to us wanted to discuss and were quite well informed, also in the recent years, even though the repression was growing. And from these 30 groups, there were only 3 where we had the impression that they believe everything that the media tells them. Obviously, they are confronted with the propaganda all over, but they are aware of that. And one group that says we look at RT, and we had a discussion with the other group, and they asked us why do you know all these things? I said, we watch RT. And then there is a Clara Zetkin forum, and we have a high-level theme about the spreading of fascism in the world. We offered this as a and it was a full room. It was a lot of young people, and they were quite well informed. They were posed a lot of questions, and the gray-haired were only 1% among them. Thank you. I'm happy if that is so. With these Monday walks, I've joined them a year ago for every week, and there are no young people.
Herr Pfeiffer, noch etwas schnell, weil das Saal, wenn wir das Saal nicht jetzt verlassen, werden wir vom Chor überrollt.
If we don't get out of the room, the chorus will come in and drown us out. He said, I found out through a pupil to get a teacher to invite 2 classes to listen to me. And I was also in Berlin. So if you know the teacher, or if you know some teacher who organizes, then we can, as a peace movement, go into the, at the end, the class, there was a youth officer, and when the youth officer said, we did contribute militarily to the Iraq war, and the youth laughed about this. So I think we can pick up on this tomorrow, because tomorrow we have a number of young people on the podium. We have young activists here in Berlin and other who would like to join in diesem Outreach. So now we have to stop this part of the conference. If there are people in the audience, you can ask these questions tomorrow, but we have to clear the room so that the chorus can have its rehearsal before the concert this evening. Thank you.